Now, one of the few examples of a review which involved a balanced panel was the National Research Council review of 2006, which I testified before. The review took 3.5 years, was 507 pages long, 1,100 references, but it's been largely ignored and dismissed by the ADA and the CDC. One of the chapters was devoted to fluoride in the brain. This is what they concluded. It is apparent that fluorides have the ability to interfere with functions of the brain. So your 6,000 studies did not impress them too much. Dr. Ferran, do you know who Dr. John Dool is?
I lectured at 40,000. No, I don't know it off the top of my head.
Dr. John Dool was the chairman of the panel there, the National Research Council panel. And this is what he said in the scientific, yes, he was the chairman of that panel. And this is what he said in an interview in Scientific American. He says, what the committee found is that we've gone with the status quo regarding fluoride for many years, for too long really, and now we need to take a fresh look. In the scientific community, people tend to think this is settled. I mean, when the US Surgeon General comes out and says this is one of the top greatest achievements of the 20th century, that's a hard hurdle to get over. But when we looked at the studies that have been done, we found that many of these questions are unsettled, and we have much less information than we should, considering how long this fluoridation has been going on. So your 6,000 studies did not impress them too much. Pan Dembeston, one of the experts in the world experts on dental fluorosis, said, we can certainly see that fluoride impacts the way proteins interact with mineralized tissue. So what effect is it having elsewhere at the cellular level? Fluoride is very powerful and needs to be treated respectfully. And that was a quote from Scientific American in 2008. So your 6,000 studies did not impress them too much. Now, Philip Grandjean said this, fluorides seem to fit in with lead, mercury, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. The effect of each toxicant may seem small, but the combined damage on a population scale can be serious, especially because the brain power of the next generation is crucial to all of us. So your 6,000 studies did not impress them too much.
But you have to look at the body of the knowledge.
And you talk about 6,000 studies, I guarantee about 5,000 of those studies are on teeth, and teeth. More IQs. Now that was five in 2006. We now have 33 studies published from China, India, Iran, and Mexico which associate a lowering of IQ with fluoride exposure. Now just recently, a meta-analysis was published by a research team from Harvard University, Choi and others, included Philip Grandjean, who's well known in environmental health circles. They looked at 27 of these studies. These 27 studies compared the IQs in high fluoride villages with low fluoride villages. And the study was published in Environmental Health Perspectives. That's the leading journal of environmental health in the world. It's published by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences, which is part of NIH that promotes fluoridation. What are they going to do now? This is right under their noses. Now, 26 of the 27 studies found a lower average IQ than in the high village compared to the low village. The Harvard scientists concluded that further investigation of fluoride's lowering of IQ should be a high research priority. The same conclusion that the NRC made in 2006, and nothing has been done. No studies have been attempted to reproduce these Chinese studies in the American context. If you don't look, you don't find. And don't assume that the absence of study is the same as absence of harm. It isn't.
And show me studies from Australia, not Iran or China, or and from areas of town that don't have running water, electricity, sewage, or an internet connection.
Where harm has been demonstrated in countries with high natural levels of fluoride, there's been practically no attempt to reproduce those findings in the United States. He says, show me a study in the United States. Well, if you did them, we could look at them. But you're not doing it. The NIH is not financing the kind of studies that we are seeing in other countries.
England. And then another thing I noticed with studies when I see anti-fluoridation studies, it's always a study that isn't quality enough to get published on PubMed, number one. Number two, it's never from the United States. I mean,
After 67 years, we don't have a gold standard epidemiological study actually demonstrating this works. The FDA has never regulated fluoride for ingestion. It's an unapproved drug. And yet it's prescribed to more people in the United States every day than any other drug in history. In the 67 years since fluoridation began, there's been little or no monitoring of fluoride levels in the bone, blood, or urine of our population.
and the thing that always bothers me about anti-fluoridationists is they never get a study from the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, England, and they're getting this data from cities in China and India and Iran and Yinzhou, and I just went there. I just went to the World Modern Dental Forum, and these Chinese studies, you can't find them on PubMed because PubMed has refused to index them for pointing out flaws.
There have been no studies in the United States investigating the relationship with fluoridation and lowering of IQ.
But you know, you would think if there was any research to show, why can't you show me one from America where there's 320 million sample subjects, a quarter without, 3/4 with? Why do you have to go to China?
There's been no studies in the United States investigating the possibility that fluoridation increases osteoarthritis rates. We have 27 million people in this country with osteoarthritis, and the first symptoms of fluoride poisoning of the bones is identical to osteoarthritis. But we're not looking. We're not looking to see if fluoride accumulates in the human pineal gland, which is what they discovered in Jennifer Luke discovered that in England. No attempt to repeat that. No attempt to repeat our animal studies which showed lower melatonin production with respect to fluoride exposure. No attempt to look to see if there's a relationship with fluoridation and Alzheimer's disease, even though one animal study treating rats, an American study, treated rats at 1 part per million of fluoride in their drinking water for 1 year and found kidney damage, brain damage, visible under the microscope, a greater uptake of aluminum into the brain, and beta amyloid deposits, which is seen as a characteristic of Alzheimer's disease. No attempt. That study was published in 1998. 14 years later, we have seen no follow-up by that from the NIH. So it's amazing. On the one hand, they attack the methodology of any study that comes out of China or India or Iran and Mexico. I think there's a certain amount of racism involved here. And yet, with their superior understanding of epidemiology, they don't make any effort to do their own studies. If they're so good at epidemiology, why aren't they repeating these studies from China? Why aren't they treating these as any toxicologist would, as a red flag? It's a red flag. It's not proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, but it's a red flag. And look at what's at stake here. Look at what's at stake. If they're right, we are irreversibly damaging the brains of millions of children in this country. And once we've determined that that's happened, as we did with lead in gasoline, and I was involved in that issue in the 1970s, by the time we finally work against the lead industry and the gasoline industry and get lead out of gasoline, yes, we now know it lowered the IQ, the average IQ of American children in that period when we were using lead in gasoline by 5 IQ points. And yes, we did reduce the number of geniuses and double the number of mentally handicapped children in our society. You would think, would you not, that we would have learned some kind of lesson from that. Now, one of the people that knows a lot about this subject is Philip Grangi. And when you start talking about the junk science, don't forget, this study was done by a research team from Harvard University. It was a meta-analysis. It was very well done. It was published in a leading American journal, the American Environmental Health Perspectives. And that journal is published by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. So you can't get away with just dismissing all this stuff as junk science. You've got to face up to the fact that we have red flags being waved on, not only on the brain, but other tissues as well. And what I find is inexcusable. You know, if we were the edge of the cliff and we were taking this risk to cure cancer, that would be one thing. But we're talking about reducing tooth decay by a minimal amount from swallowing, knowing full well that dozens of European countries, 97% of the population in Europe is not drinking fluoridated water, but they are brushing their teeth with fluoridated toothpaste. Why can't we do what the Europeans are doing without poisoning our people, without taking these risks? It's reckless, in my view, to assume that when fluoride is damaging the infant's growing tooth cells, it's not damaging other developing tissues.